The Desert Encounter. The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty plains of New Mexico Territory, 1885. Jake wiped the sweat from his brow with a weathered hand as he guided his horse, Thunder, across the seemingly endless expanse of desert. The cowboy had been riding for 3 days straight, chasing rumors of wild horses spotted near Devil's Canyon. At 28, Jake was known throughout the territory as one of the finest horsemen alive, a man who could tame any bronco and track any creature across the harshest terrain. Thunder's hooves kicked up small clouds of red dust as they approached a cluster of rock formations that jutted from the earth like ancient monuments. Jake had been through this area before, but something felt different today. The air seemed to shimmer with an odd energy, and even Thunder appeared nervous, his ears twitching at sounds that Jake couldn't hear. As they crested a small hill, Jake pulled the reins and brought Thunder to a stop. Below them, nestled between 2 large boulders, was something that made Jake question his own sanity. A metallic object, roughly the size of a barn, lay partially buried in the sand. Its surface was smooth and silver, unlike anything Jake had ever seen. Strange symbols glowed faintly along its sides, pulsing with a soft blue light. "Well, I'll be damned," Jake muttered, removing his hat to get a better look. Thunder snorted and pawed the ground nervously. Jake had heard tales from other cowboys about strange lights in the sky and mysterious objects, but he'd always dismissed them as the ravings of men who'd spent too long alone on the range. Now, faced with evidence he couldn't explain, those stories didn't seem so foolish anymore. Curiosity overcoming caution, Jake dismounted and tied Thunder to a sturdy piece of sagebrush. He approached the object slowly, his hand instinctively resting on the grip of his Colt .45. As he drew closer, he could see that part of the object was torn open, as if it had crashed with tremendous force. The air around the craft felt cooler, and Jake noticed that his pocket watch had stopped working. He tapped the glass face, but the hands remained frozen at 2:17. The silence was unnerving, even the ever-present desert insects had gone quiet. From inside the damaged craft came a sound that made Jake's blood run cold. It was somewhere between a growl and a whimper, clearly indicating that whatever had been traveling in this strange vessel was still alive. Every instinct told him to mount Thunder and ride away as fast as possible, but something held him back. Maybe it was the cowboy code that said you never left a creature in pain, or maybe it was simple human curiosity, but Jake found himself stepping closer to the opening. "Hello," he called out, feeling foolish for talking to what might be some kind of wild animal. "Anyone in there hurt?" The sound came again, softer this time, almost plaintive. Against his better judgment, Jake peered through the torn opening into the craft's interior. What he saw inside all logic and reason. The interior of the vessel was filled with soft, pulsing lights and surfaces that seemed to flow like water but felt solid to the touch. But it wasn't the alien technology that captured Jake's attention. It was the creature lying in the center of the space, clearly injured and in pain. She was unlike anything in Jake's experience or imagination. Roughly the size of a horse, but with a sleek, elongated form that spoke of grace and power, she had scales that shimmered between deep emerald and midnight blue. 4 legs ending in what looked like hands more than paws, a long serpentine neck, and wings folded against her sides that appeared to be made of the same material as butterfly wings, but strong as leather. But it was her head that truly amazed Jake. While clearly not human, there was an intelligence in her large, golden eyes that was unmistakably sentient. When she looked at him, Jake felt as if she was looking directly into his soul, seeing everything he was and everything he could be. The creature was obviously female, though Jake couldn't say how he knew this with such certainty. Perhaps it was something in her movements, or the way she held herself even while injured. She had tried to lift her head when he appeared, but pain had forced her back down. Jake could see that one of her wings was bent at an unnatural angle, and there was a gash along her left side that seeped a fluid that looked almost like liquid starlight. She was clearly in significant pain, but there was no fear in her eyes when she looked at him, only a kind of weary hope. "Easy there, girl," Jake said softly, using the same tone he used with skittish horses. "I'm not going to hurt you." To his amazement, the creature seemed to understand him. She made a sound that was almost like a purr, though deeper and more musical than any cat Jake had ever heard. Slowly, carefully, she extended her neck toward him, stopping just short of touching his outstretched hand. Jake found himself moving forward without conscious thought. He'd always had a way with animals, an ability to calm even the most frightened or aggressive creatures. This was different, though. This wasn't just an animal. This was a being with intelligence equal to or perhaps greater than his own. "You're hurt pretty bad, aren't you?" Jake said, his voice gentle. "That wing doesn't look right, and you're bleeding something fierce." The creature made another sound, this one more complex, with tones and harmonies that seemed to bypass Jake's ears and speak directly to his mind. Somehow, he understood that she was trying to communicate, trying to tell him something important. Jake had spent years learning to read the body language of horses, cattle, and wild animals. This creature's posture told him she was not just injured but exhausted, as if she had been traveling for a very long time before whatever had brought her ship down. "I don't know what you are or where you came from," Jake said, "but you need help and I can't just leave you here to die." The practical part of his mind was screaming that this was insane. He was a cowboy, not a veterinarian, and certainly not equipped to deal with alien beings. But the part of him that had always felt called to help those in need, whether they were lost travelers, injured animals, or people in trouble, wouldn't let him walk away. Jake looked around the interior of the craft, trying to understand what he was seeing. The walls seemed to pulse gently with their own light, and symbols that hurt his eyes to look at directly covered many surfaces. There were what might have been controls or instruments, but they bore no resemblance to anything he'd ever seen. The creature watched him explore her ship, and Jake got the distinct impression that she was evaluating him just as carefully as he was evaluating her. There was something almost appreciative in her gaze, as if she found him interesting or attractive in some way that transcended species. "This is your ship, isn't it?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. "You came from up there," he gestured toward the sky, "and something went wrong." Again, that complex musical sound that seemed to carry meaning beyond words. This time, Jake caught impressions of vast distances, of loneliness, and of a desperate search for something that had led her here, to this remote corner of Earth. Jake made his decision. He couldn't move her in her current condition, but he could make her more comfortable and tend to her injuries as best he could. He doctored plenty of hurt animals in his time, and while this was certainly different, the basics were probably the same. "I'm going to help you," he said firmly. "I don't know how yet, but I'm not leaving you here alone." The creature's eyes seemed to brighten, and she made that purring sound again. Slowly, carefully, she lifted one of her front appendages. Jake realized they really were more like hands than paws, with long, delicate digits, and gently touched his arm. The moment her skin made contact with his, Jake felt a shock that wasn't quite electrical but wasn't entirely different either. Images flashed through his mind. Star fields beyond imagination, worlds of impossible beauty, and a sense of connection that went deeper than anything he'd ever experienced. In that instant, Jake understood that this wasn't just a chance encounter. This creature, this being, had been searching for something specific, and somehow, impossibly, she had found it in him. As the sun began to set over the New Mexico desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Jake sat beside an alien Dragoness in her crashed ship and began to understand that his life would never be the same. The universe had just revealed itself to be far larger and more wondrous than he had ever imagined, and he was about to become part of something extraordinary. The desert wind howled outside the craft, but inside, Cowboy and Alien regarded each other with growing understanding. Jake had come looking for wild horses, but he had found something far more precious, a being from another world who had traveled unimaginable distances to find him. As night fell and the stars emerged in the clear desert sky, Jake began to tend to the alien Dragoness's wounds, starting a chain of events that would change not just his own fate, but the destiny of two species separated by the vast cosmos. The Old West was about to meet the far future, and Jake was going to be at the center of it all. Thunder nervously from outside, as if sensing that his master's life had just taken a turn toward the impossible. But Jake was too focused on the injured being before him to worry about anything beyond helping her heal. He had no idea that she was already beginning to heal him in ways he couldn't yet understand. The first night passed quietly, with Jake keeping watch over his unusual patient and slowly beginning to comprehend that he was no longer just a cowboy riding the lonely trails of the American frontier. He was now the protector and companion of a being from the stars, and their story was just beginning, the healing bond. 3 days had passed since Jake first discovered the crashed vessel, and its extraordinary occupant. During this time, he had barely left the alien Dragoness's side, tending to her wounds with a mixture of traditional cowboy remedies and an instinctive understanding of what she needed that seemed to come from nowhere. Jake had set up a simple camp outside the ship, close enough to check on his patient regularly, but far enough away to give Thunder some comfort. The horse had gradually gotten used to the strange situation, though he still snorted nervously whenever the wind carried the alien scent in his direction. The Dragoness, Jake had started thinking of her as Lady, for lack of a better name, was healing remarkably fast. The gash on her side had closed completely, leaving only a faint silver line where the wound had been. Her wing, which had been bent and useless when he first found her, was now able to fold properly against her body, though she still favored it when moving. What amazed Jake most, however, was the way she seemed to be healing him as well. Not physically, he hadn't been injured, but in ways that were harder to define. The loneliness that had been his constant companion for years was fading. The restlessness that had driven him to wander the frontier was being replaced by a sense of purpose and belonging that he'd never experienced before. On the morning of the fourth day, Jake woke to find Lady outside the ship for the first time, stretched out in the early sunlight like a giant cat. Her scales caught the light and threw it back in patterns that made Jake's eyes water if he looked too directly at them. She was, he realized, incredibly beautiful in a way that transcended any earthly standard. Feeling better? Jake asked as he approached with a pot of coffee and some breakfast. Lady made that musical sound he was beginning to recognize as her form of speech. Over the past few days, Jake had started to pick up subtle differences in her tones, almost like learning a new language. This particular sound carried notes of gratitude and something that might have been affection. As Jake sat down near her, Lady did something that surprised him. She moved closer, settling her large form so that she was lying next to where he sat. The warmth that radiated from her scales was pleasant in the cool desert morning, and Jake found himself unconsciously leaning against her side. The moment their bodies made contact, Jake felt that same electric sensation he'd experienced on the first day, but stronger now and more complex. Images flowed through his mind, but these weren't random flashes. They were memories, her memories. Jake saw her home world, a place of soaring crystal cities and vast libraries that floated in perpetual twilight. He felt her loneliness there, surrounded by others of her kind, but somehow always apart, always searching for something she couldn't name. He experienced her decision to leave, to travel across the galaxy in search of whatever it was she felt was missing from her life. Through her memories, Jake learned that her people were ancient beyond human comprehension, masters of science and technology that bordered on magic. They were explorers and scholars, beings who had mapped much of the galaxy and made contact with hundreds of different species. But for all their knowledge and power, they had lost something essential: the ability to form deep, meaningful connections with others. Lady's people mated for reproduction and cooperated for survival, but the kind of profound emotional and spiritual bonding that Jake recognized from human relationships was something they had evolved beyond, or perhaps never possessed. Most of her kind saw this as evolution, as a step toward perfect rationality and efficiency. But Lady was different. She had always felt that something was missing, had always yearned for the kind of connection that her people's ancient legends spoke of, but no longer experienced. Her journey to Earth hadn't been random. She had been following signals, patterns in space that spoke to something deep in her genetic memory. As these visions faded, Jake found himself looking into Lady's golden eyes with new understanding. She hadn't just crashed on Earth by accident. She had been searching for something specific, and incredibly, impossibly, she had found it in him. "You came looking for love," Jake said softly, the words coming from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. "Your people forgot how to love, but you remembered, and you came looking for someone who could love you back." Lady's response was unlike any sound she had made before. It was complex and layered, filled with harmonies that seemed to resonate in Jake's bones. But more than the sound, it was the way she moved that told him he was right. She lifted her great head and gently touched her forehead to his, a gesture so tender and intimate that Jake felt tears spring to his eyes. In that moment, Jake understood that what was happening between them transcended species, biology, or any rational explanation. This wasn't just attraction or friendship. This was the kind of soul-deep connection that poets wrote about but most people never experienced. Over the following days, their bond grew stronger. Lady began to show Jake wonders from her ship that everything he thought he knew about the world. Devices that could create food from thin air, instruments that could map the stars, and most incredibly, a translation device that allowed them to communicate more directly. The device looked like a small crystal that Lady had retrieved from deep within her ship. When she placed it near Jake's head, he could suddenly understand not just her words but the emotions and concepts behind them. Her actual name, he learned, was a series of harmonic frequencies that meant something like, "She who seeks the hidden light." But she had grown fond of the simple name, Lady, that he had given her. Through this new ability to communicate, Jake learned that Lady's people had once been very much like humans in their capacity for emotion and connection. But millions of years ago, they had chosen to suppress these aspects of themselves, believing that emotion made them weak and inefficient. They had succeeded so well that most of them could no longer feel the deeper connections that made life meaningful. "But you're different," Jake said as they sat together watching the sunset paint the desert sky in brilliant colors. "You kept that part of yourself alive." "I am considered defective by my people," Lady replied, her translated voice carrying notes of ancient sadness. "I was tolerated because of my skills as an explorer, but I was never truly accepted. I left because I could not bear the emptiness any longer." Jake reached out and placed his hand on her neck, marveling at the warmth and strength he felt there. "You're not defective. You're what they used to be, what they could be again if they weren't so afraid." Lady's response was to curl her neck around him in what he was learning was her people's equivalent of an embrace. "I had given up hope of ever finding someone who could understand," she said. "My people thought I was chasing myths and legends, but you see me as I truly am." As their relationship deepened, Jake began to notice changes in himself as well. His senses were becoming sharper, his reflexes faster. He could see farther and hear sounds that had previously been beyond human perception. Most remarkably, he was beginning to sense Lady's emotions and thoughts even when they weren't touching, as if their minds were somehow linking together. "Is this normal?" Jake asked one evening as they watched the stars emerge. "This connection we have?" Lady was quiet for a long moment, her great head tilted up toward the night sky. "There are legends among my people," she said finally. "Stories of a time when two beings could merge their souls completely, becoming something greater than either could be alone. It was called the deep bond, and it was said to be the highest form of love possible." "And you think that's what's happening to us?" "I believe so," Lady said, her voice filled with wonder. "But it requires complete trust, complete openness between the bonded pair, and it changes both beings permanently. There would be no going back." Jake considered this as he looked up at the stars, which seemed brighter and more numerous than they had ever been before. The idea of permanent change might have frightened him a week ago, but now it filled him with excitement rather than fear. "What would change?" he asked. "You would gain many of my abilities," Lady explained. "Enhanced strength extended the ability to survive in environments that would kill a normal human. And I would gain some of your qualities, your adaptability, your emotional depth, your creative problem-solving skills. And we'd be connected forever. In every way that matters," Lady said softly. "We would share thoughts, emotions, even memories. We would become two halves of a single whole." Jake thought about his life before meeting Lady, the loneliness, the endless searching for something he couldn't name, the feeling that he was meant for something more than just drifting from town to town. Then he thought about the past week, how complete he felt when he was with her, how the universe seemed to make sense in a way it never had before. "I want that," he said quietly. "I want a bond with you." Lady's entire form seemed to glow brighter in the starlight, and Jake could feel waves of joy and love radiating from her. "The process is not without risk," she warned. "If something goes wrong, we could both die, and once it begins, it cannot be stopped." Jake smiled, the expression feeling more natural and genuine than any he could remember. "I've been taking risks my whole life," he said, "but I've never risked anything for something this important." Lady moved so that she was facing him directly, her golden eyes reflecting the starlight. "Then we will attempt the deep bond," she said solemnly. "But we must prepare carefully. The joining of two different species has never been attempted before. We will be entering unknown territory." As they began to plan for the bonding process, Jake felt an excitement building within him that was unlike anything he had ever experienced. He was about to undergo a transformation that would change him forever, linking his life and soul to a being from another world. The cowboy who had been content to drift across the frontier was about to become something unprecedented, a bridge between two species, two worlds, two very different ways of existing. The stars seemed to pulse with approval overhead, and Jake had the strange feeling that the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would emerge from the union of human and alien, earthly emotion and cosmic wisdom. Whatever happened next, he knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be, with exactly the being he was meant to be with. The transformation was about to begin, the deep bond. The preparation for the deep bond took 3 more days, during which Lady carefully explained the process to Jake and made modifications to her ship's systems to accommodate their unprecedented union. Jake spent this time in a state of mixed anticipation and calm acceptance, knowing that he was about to embark on a journey that would fundamentally alter everything about his existence. Lady had been meticulous in her preparations. She had accessed the ancient records stored in her ship's memory banks, studying the legends and fragmentary accounts of deep bonding that her people had preserved from their distant past. Most of these records were incomplete or heavily corrupted, but she was able to piece together enough information to understand the basic process. The bonding chamber in my ship was designed for emergency medical procedures, Lady explained as she showed Jake the crystalline alcove where the transformation would take place. But it can be reconfigured to facilitate the joining of two life forces. The process will merge our genetic patterns, our neural pathways, and our spiritual essences into a single, unified being. Jake studied the chamber, which looked like a cocoon made of living light. Panels covered in alien symbols pulsed gently around the curved walls, and the air inside shimmered with an energy that made his skin tingle. How long will it take? The physical transformation occurs over the course of 1 solar day, Lady replied. But the mental and spiritual integration will continue for many days afterward. During the process, we will exist in a shared consciousness, experiencing each other's memories, thoughts, and emotions completely. The night before the bonding, Jake sat outside the ship with Lady, looking up at the star-filled sky and thinking about the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. Thunder grazed peacefully nearby, having finally accepted the alien presence as part of his master's new reality. "Are you frightened?" Lady asked, her voice soft in the desert stillness. Jake considered the question carefully. "No," he said finally. "I probably should be, but I'm not. This feels right in a way that nothing else in my life ever has, like this is what I was always meant to do." "I feel the same," Lady replied. "For the first time in my very long life, I am not alone. Even if the bonding fails and we both die, these past days with you have been worth everything I endured to find you." Jake reached out and touched her scales, marveling again at their warmth and the way they seemed to pulse with inner light. "It's not going to fail," he said with quiet confidence. "We're supposed to be together. I can feel it." As dawn approached, they entered the ship together for the final preparations. Lady activated the bonding chamber systems, and Jake watched in fascination as the crystalline walls began to glow more brightly, and the air filled with a harmonious humming that seemed to resonate in his bones. "Once we enter the chamber together," Lady explained, "the process will begin automatically. Our bodies will be held in suspension while our genetic and neural patterns are analyzed and merged. The ship's systems will monitor our life signs and adjust the process to ensure compatibility." Jake nodded, then removed his clothes and weapons, setting them aside carefully. The bonding process would be more effective if there were no barriers between them. Lady watched him with those luminous golden eyes, and Jake could feel her love and desire flowing through their growing connection. "Ready?" Lady asked as they stood at the entrance to the chamber. "Ready," Jake replied without hesitation. They entered the chamber together, and immediately Jake felt the energy field surrounding them intensify. The crystalline walls pulsed with increasing brightness, and the humming sound grew louder and more complex. Lady positioned herself so that her body was aligned with Jake's, her larger form curled protectively around him. The transformation began gently, with Jake feeling a warm, tingling sensation spreading through his body. At first, it was almost pleasant, like sinking into a hot bath after a long day in the saddle. But as the process intensified, the sensations became more dramatic. Jake felt his consciousness expanding, reaching out beyond the confines of his individual mind to touch Lady's thoughts. At first, the contact was light and tentative, like two people brushing hands in passing. But gradually, the connection deepened until he could feel her presence as clearly as his own heartbeat. Through their linked consciousness, Jake experienced Lady's memories as if they were his own. He soared through the space between stars, felt the loneliness of her long journey, and understood the desperate hope that had driven her to seek him out. In return, Lady experienced his human memories, the freedom of riding across open plains, the satisfaction of honest work, and the deep loneliness that had mirrored her own. The physical changes began several hours into the process. Jake felt his bones becoming denser and stronger, his muscles gaining new power and flexibility. His senses sharpened dramatically. He could hear Lady's two hearts beating in perfect synchronization, could smell the complex chemistry of the ship's atmosphere, could see patterns of energy flowing through the chamber walls that had been invisible before. More remarkably, he could feel scales beginning to grow along his arms and back, not replacing his skin, but integrating with it to create something entirely new. The scales were smaller and more subtle than Lady's, with a deep blue-green coloration that complemented his dark hair and eyes. Lady was changing as well. Her form was becoming more compact and streamlined, while retaining all of her grace and power. Her scales took on new patterns that seemed to echo Jake's human bone structure, and her eyes gained flecks of brown that reminded Jake of rich earth. But the most profound changes were happening at levels deeper than the physical. Jake felt his mind expanding, gaining access to knowledge and abilities that Lady had accumulated over her long lifetime. He understood now how her ship's systems worked, could read the alien symbols that covered its walls, and possessed an intuitive grasp of technologies that human science wouldn't develop for centuries. At the same time, Lady was gaining human intuition and creativity, the ability to see patterns and solutions that her more logical thought processes had missed. She was learning to feel emotions with the intensity that humans experienced them, to find joy in simple pleasures, and to appreciate the beauty in imperfection. The merging of their memories was the most intense part of the process. Jake experienced Lady's childhood on her crystal spire, felt the gradual realization that she was different from her peers, and shared her decision to leave everything familiar behind in search of something her people had forgotten. Lady, in turn, experienced Jake's human upbringing, his love for the freedom of the frontier, and his gradual understanding that he was searching for a purpose greater than himself. As their memories intertwined, Jake began to understand that their meeting was not coincidence but destiny. Lady's people had once been capable of the kind of deep emotional connections that humans took for granted, but they had deliberately evolved beyond such attachments. However, a few individuals in each generation retained the capacity for true bonding, and these individuals inevitably found themselves drawn to seek out compatible partners across the galaxy. The ancient legends spoke of successful bonds between different species, creating new forms of life that combined the best qualities of both parent races. These bonded beings were said to be the foundation for entirely new civilizations, bridges between worlds that would otherwise remain forever separate. Near the end of the first day, Jake felt the final stage of the transformation beginning. His consciousness merged so completely with Lady's that he could no longer tell where his thoughts ended and hers began. They became a single awareness experiencing existence from two perspectives simultaneously, seeing reality through both human and alien eyes. When the process finally completed and the chamber's energy field faded, the being that emerged was something unprecedented in the history of both species. Jake retained his human appearance for the most part, but his enhanced physique and the subtle scales that covered parts of his body marked him as something more. Lady's form had become more compact and elegant, incorporating human proportions while retaining all of her alien grace and power. More importantly, they shared a mental and emotional connection that was absolute and permanent. They could communicate without words, share sensory experiences, and understand each other with perfect clarity. Jake could access Lady's memories and knowledge at will, while Lady could tap into his intuition and emotional depth whenever needed. As they stood together in the chamber, still adjusting to their transformed bodies and expanded consciousness, Jake realized that they had become something entirely new, not human, not alien, but a bridge between worlds. Through their bond, they carried the potential to unite not just their two species, but possibly many others across the galaxy. "How do you feel?" Lady asked, though the question was more for form's sake than necessity. Through their bond, she could feel exactly how he felt. "Complete," Jake replied, marveling at how natural it felt to speak with thoughts as well as words. For the first time in my life, I feel complete. They made their way outside the ship, where Thunder waited patiently. The horse seemed to sense that something fundamental had changed about his master, but after a few nervous snorts, he accepted the transformation with the practical stoicism of his kind. Jake looked up at the star-filled sky with his enhanced vision and could now see things that had been invisible to human eyes. The faint trails of distant spacecraft, the subtle patterns of energy that connected all living things, and most remarkably, a network of signals that suggested his and Lady's successful bonding had been noticed by others across the galaxy. "We're not alone," Jake said, though he was still processing what his new senses were telling him. "There are others out there who will want to find us." "Some will be friends," Lady agreed, "but others may see us as a threat. A successful bond between species opens possibilities that many in the galaxy would prefer to keep closed." Jake felt no fear at this prospect. The bond had given him not just Lady's knowledge and abilities, but also her courage and determination. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as a single, unified being. As the dawn broke over the New Mexico desert, painting the landscape in shades of gold and red, Jake and the being who had once been called, "She who seeks the hidden light," stood together as something new under the sun. They were no longer simply human and alien, but the first of a new kind of life that would bridge the gap between worlds. Their transformation was complete, but their story was just beginning. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders and dangers, and they would need all of their combined strengths to navigate what lay ahead. But for now, they were content to exist in perfect unity, two souls that had found each other across the immensity of space and chosen to become one. The Old West would soon give way to a new frontier that stretched across the stars, and Jake and Lady would be the pioneers who led the way into that infinite future.